maybe we can just take a moment to just really kind of stop and think about, you know, what we actually do when we worship. Is it just singing songs? Is it just listening to music? Is it, you know, but it's not, it's actually giving God a gift back for all the gifts that He's given us. So just as we come tonight to start to worship, let's just pray and, you know, just think about how amazing He is and all the amazing things He's done for us. So God, I just thank You so much for, you know, everything that You have done in our lives, and I just pray that this time of worship will just be, you know, a gift to You and just music to Your ears. And just, yeah, just pray this in Your name. Amen.
Lord, When you come to worship God, it can be a scary thing, or an unusual thing, or something that doesn't seem quite right, but it's the most natural thing in the world. It's what we were actually created to do. So when you're worshiping and you're here with your friends, but when you're singing to God, it's just you and Him, just remember that. So it doesn't matter what anyone else sings around you, it's just between you and God. We're going to sing a song called Champion. It's about God, He fights for you. For you personally, He fights for you and wins battles for you. So that's the God that we're worshipping tonight. Victorious, you have come. What was stolen, you brought it back to us. Oh, victory, you have won. Victorious, you have come. What was stolen, you brought it back to us. Our champion, you fight for us. You made a way when there was none. Our champion, you're strong enough. The debt we owe, you paid in blood. The one in whom we belong. We'll lift our voice, join the song. We were open, now forever yours. Forever yours. Our champion, you fight for us. You made a way when there was none. Our champion, you're strong enough. The debt we owe, you paid in blood. Our champion, you fight for us. You made a way when there was none. Our champion, you're strong enough. The debt we owe, you paid in blood. We will shout it
this place here up with praise. Can you hear it? The sound of heaven touching earth. The sound of heaven touching earth. Our Father, all of heaven rolls your name. Sing louder. Let this place here up with praise.
nurturing days. And Lord, everything we do, every song we sing is to you in the name of Jesus. King Jesus, you are the name we are lifting high. Thank you, Father.
What with God, the Lord, our
the glory. Yours is the name above all names.
God, yours is the name above all names, and we're so honoured that we can just come to worship you tonight. And we just thank you for Robby, and we just bless him just now. We just pray that whatever it is that he's got to say to us, that we've got ears to listen to what you've got to say through us. We just thank you in your name. Amen.
Thank you so much. Round of applause to the band. Wow. Now we're going to have a special guest, Robby Dawkins, all the way from
Illinois.
Robby, would you like to come up?
Come on up. Robby's got an amazing testimony, which I don't know if he's going to share that tonight or not, but Robby was, in fact, as you can tell by looking at him, born in Japan. I mean, look at him, that's how you know. So he's come all the way from Illinois to be with us today, so we're so privileged to have him here. He's been in Bishop Briggs over the weekend. Has anybody been at the Bishop Briggs events? Yeah, amazing. So that's great. We're so pleased to have him here with us at Campfire as well. And thankful to Bishop Briggs as well for letting us have you here for the night as well, which is great. So we're just going to pray for you and then let you get going. Is that okay? Do you need a translator to know what we're saying or anything? Yeah. we're trying our best to.
Subtitles.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll just pray for you now, and then we'll get started. Lord, we thank you so much for Robby and for his ministry, Lord, and for just him following your call to go out and live for you. And I just ask that tonight we will almost ignore Robby and the hype that we know about him, Lord, and just focus on you. And I ask that you'll speak through Robby and that we really have ears to listen to what you want to say to us tonight. I thank you so much for just the way that you filled him with your spirit, and that he's just been obedient and coming in and pouring that out to us as well, Lord. So we just ask that we will have eyes fixed on you tonight, and we will have ears to hear, and we'll thank you for your servant Robby and his work for us. Amen.
Unspilled oat, man. There we go. I got it. How you guys doing? Oh my goodness. How are you guys doing? There we go. That's cool. Man, you guys are a good looking bunch. Are you aware of that? It's okay. You go like, yeah. We got this. We got the good looking boys now. Look around at yourselves. Okay, you don't seem that convinced, but take my word for it. You guys look good. Well, cool. Well, it's good to be with you. Half of me is from you. My mother was Scottish. Yeah, where I get all the good looks from. And she was, if she was indicative of the godly fruit of Scotland, then you guys are doing good, because she was like the most godly person I've ever known in my entire life. How many of you know who Heidi Baker is? Anybody knows who Heidi Baker is? Oh, 4 of you. Okay. Never mind then. No, Heidi Baker is like probably one of the most loving people I've ever met. And I told Heidi Baker, I said, my mom could take you in a love fest. She would just take you out, you know. And of course, Heidi's like so sweet. She's like, of course she could. That's what Heidi does. All right, I'm trying to, obviously my head is like so much bigger than anybody else's who's ever born this before. So, but that's all right. Well, hey, I'm excited to be with you guys, and I love being with young people. I have 6 of my own young people. I have 6 sons, and they are all love Jesus passionately, and they're great kids, and I don't have any hair because of them. I'll just say that much. I'm part of that though too. But they're great boys, and they love Jesus, and they're crazy about sharing Him, and I kind of feel that there's a little bit of likeness in that of you here. And I just want to, if I could, I do want to share my testimony with you, because I feel like that maybe you'll identify with it, and maybe a few of you have a sense of, likeness to it in some ways. But as they said, I was born in Japan. My parents were missionaries to Japan, and my sisters used to I had two older sisters, and they used to make me cry when I was little. That's where you go, oh. Little more. Okay, I feel better now. Okay, they would make me cry because they said I had "Made in Japan" stamped on my butt. And I believed them, and I couldn't see it. And so I was like terrified because I just knew it was back there, but I could never see it. And so, thank God, when I got married, I had my wife verify that it wasn't there. So, bless her heart, she had to take one for the team to look at. But anyway, before I was born, a couple of bizarre things. First of all, my parents weren't supposed to be able to have any more kids. My dad had a vasectomy, which eliminates you from having children if you're a male. So it was quite the surprise to them when my mother was pregnant, and it was really bizarre because Satan appeared to my mom and told my mom that if she allowed me to be born, that he would kill both her and me at birth. And my mom, like I said, she's the most godly person I've ever known. And her response to that was, well, God obviously has a plan for this child's life, and I'm not going to put my hand against, what God is doing. And Satan then appeared to my dad, and it was like the way that they appeared, it wasn't like in a dream or a vision or anything. He physically appeared in the room. And my mom was actually in this laundry room doing laundry, and Satan appeared to her in a human form, and he gave her this message where there was no doors for him to come in, but just appeared there and said this message. And then also to my dad appeared the same way. And there's a reason I'm telling you that story, because that story actually, I believe, has more to do with you guys than it does me. And my dad had the same response. He said, well, God obviously has a plan, for this child, and we're not going to put our hand against anything that God's doing. And so they both had that same response, but neither one of them told each other about the visitation that they had had. And so when my mom went on with the pregnancy, of course, because she was, trusting God, Satan appeared to her actually every month throughout the pregnancy, telling her that same message. And in Japan, it would have been very easy to get an abortion, and if they were in the United States, it wouldn't have been. But in Japan, it would have been pretty easy for them to get an abortion. And so, and of course, there was things that she could have done to try to lose the baby and things like that. But my mom just really, throughout that, trusted God, even though she had times of real, paralyzing panic attacks. And of course, that was just the enemy trying to make her afraid to try to, dispense with the pregnancy. And so, an angel appeared to my mom and told my mom, because of her faithfulness and her response to the Lord, that I would be born, and that I would be born as a result on Easter Sunday morning of that year. And that was a sign of God fulfilling his purpose, in my life. Now, that was good news and bad news. The good news is I would be born. The bad news is that meant I was born 2.5 weeks late. And any woman that has ever had a baby knows a late baby is not a good thing, because that means a bigger baby. You can only imagine. What are you laughing at? Okay. So anyway, but my mother had concluded the whole time that she would still die. She really believed that the entire time. I mean, it really makes me sad to think about that, but she really believed that. And of course, Easter of that year, that Sunday morning, I was born. And my mother had written a note to my dad, basically saying goodbye, because she thought that she would not live. But guys, let me tell you something. Satan's a liar. And he'll lie to you. And he'll threaten you with things he can't even do. But he'll try to get you to believe it, to get you to do it for him. And that's what he was trying to do. And I believe that has so much to do about you guys, because here's the thing. My life is committed to letting every one of you know how much power and authority that you actually have, and how much that you and I are not even using all the power and authority that we have, and Christ is inviting us to use it. And he wants us to step into that. He wants us to use that for his glory. You are so powerful with Christ in you. And we have no idea how much power we actually have and how much authority we have. And if we'll use it with the humility that Jesus used it with, if we'll use it with that purpose that Jesus used it with, which is to glorify the Father, not himself, man, we'll see so much more happen on this planet that we live in and that we live on. And so anyway, I would love to say like my childhood was therefore like, walking on water or multiplying, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. It was not. So it wasn't, it was sort of, from my perspective, it'd be like, wow, why did the enemy waste his time? There wasn't much there. But when I was 7 years old, we had these, it's sort of uneventful, but when we were 7 years old, my parents moved back to the United States, and I went to go speak at this, at 7, I went to go preach. We had these speakers come in, these guys from the local university, and they came in and they were preaching at our church. And here, as a 7-year-old, it was the first time I had heard the gospel being shared from somebody other than my parents. And as they were sharing this, and they turned all the lights out in the sanctuary, and they lit one little candle. Now, we didn't have like light shining in from that. But if you can imagine just one little candle, like a birthday candle, and this whole room being dark, immediately everything gets dark. But soon your eyes begin to adjust, and that little candle illuminates the whole room. And they were talking about, God has intended you to shine your light. He's intended you to let your light shine, and for you to share Jesus with people and to bring people to Christ. And so my eyes started to adjust as they had that, all of a sudden I'm looking around and the whole room is glowing from this tiny little candle. And they were like, see what impact one little candle has on this whole room. And it was a sanctuary that would seat about 300 people. And it blew me away. And so that night they said, if you want to light your candle, if you want to burn for Jesus, we want you to come down and accept Jesus right now. And guys, I jumped up at 7 years old. Now, here's the thing. That morning, I had stolen 2 sticks of gum from my sister. And I knew that it was the start of a hardcore thief, criminal life by stealing those 2 sticks. And conviction hit me, and I thought, oh, dear God, I'm a thief. I'm going to be a criminal the rest of my life. I need Jesus bad. And so I got up and I ran down there, and there was a bunch of young people there. There was probably about as many as there are in this room, and several, came down. And I remember praying down there and giving my life to Christ, and it was so powerful. Well, we had these guys all week long in our church, and they were ministering, the entire week. And so the next night, and they told my dad, they said, look, we don't have like a bunch of messages. We only have one. And he goes, I don't care. Preach the same one every night. So every night, for 6 days, they preached the same exact message, lit that same candle, and every time they did, I came running down there. And it wasn't because I'd stolen more gum. But after finally the third night, my mother comes up to me and she goes, Robby. And she goes, come here. And I said, what? She goes, you know that you only have to do this one time. You don't have to keep doing this again and again. And I told my mom, I said, I'm not doing this because I feel like I need to do it. I said, I feel something down here. And I like what I feel. And I didn't have the words for it then, but now I know that to be the presence of God. And I was attracted to God's presence. I could feel God's presence down there. And I wanted to be close to God's presence. I didn't care what it took. I didn't care what I had to. I just had to be close to where God's presence was. And so a couple of years pass, and my parents, again, being from Japan, every now and then, I would hear my parents sort of speak in Japanese in church, and then one would speak in Japanese and the other would interpret. And I was like, that's so weird. Why do they do Japanese? Why don't they just speak in English? And I didn't realize until this guy came to my school. I was scholarshiped. We were in the poor section of town, pastoring this church. And so we didn't have the money to go to like a really nice school. But this church had given I and my sisters a scholarship to this really nice school because they were just trying to help pastors' kids out who couldn't afford to go to a nice school. And so I go to this really nice school, and they had a chapel service, and they had this guy come in, and he was talking about being filled with the Holy Spirit and Holy Spirit's power and speaking in tongues. Well, as he's beginning to talk about speaking in tongues, it occurred to me, my parents were not speaking in Japanese. They were speaking in this thing called tongues. And I never realized that before. I had all this time thought they were speaking Japanese. And so this guy gets up, and this guy kept saying, every time he would talk, he goes, if you come, you'll be filled with the Holy Spirit's power. And every time he said power, he hit his fist, man. And he's like, don't you want to be filled with power? And I was like, man, this power he keeps talking about, if I get filled with that, I know I will levitate. And I will fly around the room. I mean, every time he said power, I was like, yes. And so he says, who wants that? Who wants to be filled with those? And I got up, and I was the first person down there. Now, this was a Christian school, and so we didn't have a ton of students. So they had elementary school, middle school. I don't know how you guys categorize this. And then they had like what we would call high school. We had high school, and so we were all together at this chapel service. And so there was this one guy who was about 16 years old he played on the football team. He came forward. And then there was the popular girl in school. The one that she was popular and she thought she was popular and thought she was really cool. But she actually came forward, which I thought was cool. And they were standing on either side of me. And so he first goes to the girl who's popular, and she's kind of like just standing there like, okay. She's kind of looking around like, I hope I'll get called while I'm waiting up here, for this one open. And so all of a sudden, he comes up and he prays for her, and she's just kind of twirling her hair. I'm like, and then all of a sudden I look and her hand starts to shake. And I'm like, that's cool. And I'm like, if she starts levitating, I'm in, man. And all of a sudden her hand starts to shake. She's like, looking at her hand, and then she pulls out her other hand, and her other hand's shaking. And she goes, I'm on fire! And bam! She hit the ground. And I was like, yes! And I kept looking down, looking to see if she was levitating yet. And I'm like, oh, she's catching air, man. She's going to catch air at any moment. And I kept watching, nothing happened. And she's like laying on there, she's like, ah, fire, fire! And I'm like, yeah. So this dude comes to me and he starts to pray for me. And he's praying for me to be filled with the Holy Spirit and to be able to speak into, and all of a sudden I'm not feeling anything. And I'm like, and he keeps praying, and he says, all right, do you want to speak in tongues? And I was like, well, yeah. I mean, that's why I'm up here. And he's like, well, then go ahead. And I was like, I don't feel anything. And he looks at me and he goes, sometimes you don't. And he says, but just do this by faith. And I'm like, I don't feel anything. And he looks at me and he goes, son, let me ask you a question. He said, if God says he'll give you something, he'll give it. And he said, does God lie? And I was like, no, God doesn't lie. I've never said God lies. No, he doesn't lie. And he says, if he says he'll give you something, he'll give it to you. He says, so go ahead. You can go ahead and speak in tongues if you like. And I was like, trying to work up my best Japanese I could. And I'm like, "Ugh," and I'm like still not feeling anything. So he moves on to the jock, to the football player. And he starts praying for him, and the guy's like, bam! He hits the floor, and I'm like, dude is holding out on me. And he's like all flopping around. He's like, she's over there, I'm on fire! And I'm like, what are you holding back on me for? And he goes, just go ahead and lie. And I'm like, no. He's like, just keep doing that. So I run home after school, and I told my mom, I said, guess what? I said, we had this guy come to school. He talked about being filled with the Holy Spirit, speaking in tongues. And I said, thank you. I thought this was Japanese the whole time. And I said, and he prayed for, I said, but Mom, I didn't feel anything. And I said, what's wrong with me? And she looks at me and she goes, oh, sweetheart, it's not you. You don't have to. And I said, yeah, but I didn't, they were flopping around. I didn't. And she goes, sweetheart, does God lie? And I'm like, what is this with God lying? No, I've never accused God of lying. And she goes, if he says he'll give you something, go ahead, keep speaking in tongues. And she goes, you'll find power comes as a result, and the effects of power in your life. And I was like, well, I still don't feel anything. And so I kept it up. She was just doing a little bit of that every day. And so I was working up my best Japanese every day, a little bit. And about 2 weeks later, I go to this park that was down the street. And we had this girl who would come to the park, and her name was Tina. Now, I affectionately referred to her as Evil Tina. Because Tina wasn't just like a normal Tina. Tina was like evil. And like every one of the things at the park she claimed was hers. She would go to the swings and grab all the swings. She's like, they're my swings, get away. She would go down the slide and stop herself at the end so you couldn't slide. And you'd be like, hey, you want to slide? She goes, it's my slide. She would be on the teeter-totter, sitting on one end. And I'm like, you do realize it takes two people, right? She's like, it's my teeter-totter, get away. And I'm like, all right. She just sits there all alone. And then finally, we were constantly trying, and she would hiss at me and spit at me. I know she was like the daughter of Beelzebub. You know what I mean? She was evil. And so after several weeks of after this guy had come, and I had been praying like this, and I had tried to share Jesus with Tina several times. I remember I was 9 years old. And so I went to the park that day, and Tina was there by herself. There was nobody else in the park. And so I walked up to her and I said, hey, Tina, I said, I want to tell you about Jesus again. And she's like, okay. And I'm like, really? She's like, yeah. I'm like, you're not going to spit on me again, are you? She's like, no. And I was like, okay. And so I started telling her, and she just stands there kind of listening, but with this sort of scowl and look on her face. And then at the end, I said, hey, Tina. I said, it took about 5 minutes. And I said, hey, Tina, would you like to accept Jesus? And she goes, yeah. And I was like, what? And she goes, yeah. And I'm like, really? And she goes, yeah. And I'm like, you're serious? You want to accept Jesus? And she goes, yeah, I think I'd like that. And I said, all right, well, you're going to have to kneel in the sandbox. As evil as she was, I felt like it had to hurt when she was kneeling. You know what I mean? And I'm like, lift up your skirt. Because she had this little skirt on. I made her lift her skirt and put her knees in the sand, man. I was like, as evil as you've been, this has got to cost you something. And so right here in the sandbox, she's kneeling, and I pray with her, and she gives her life to Jesus. I mean, I've thought about it many times, and that Tina's probably like a minister now. And she makes people kneel in sandboxes. Probably to this very day because of that episode. And so she gets up and she goes, that's awesome. And I was like, really? And she goes, yeah. And after that, I saw Tina just become this different person. And that was so cool. And I ran home and I told my mom, I said, guess what? I said, I just prayed with Tina, evil Tina, and she just gave her life to Jesus. And my mom looks and she goes, see? That's because you've received power in your life. And I was like, that's it? And she goes, that's it. And so I kept doing that, and I kept, practicing that. Well, as I got a little bit older, when I hit about 12 years old, all of a sudden, because my parents were in ministry, I got to where that I felt like my dad was a really smart, brilliant person, like in business. He was a real entrepreneur, but he was a passionate evangelist. A really good preacher. My mother was an incredible Bible teacher. They were Bible profs at a Bible college. And I remember as I started getting older and I was going to this private school, all of a sudden I started looking around at all these kids that went to this private school. And they had like nice cars. I would go spend the night at friends' house, and they had really nice houses, and we lived in the hood. You know what I mean? We lived in a rough area. And I started feeling like, man, I don't like where we live. You know, and I don't like the fact that my parents are pastors. And they need to stop pastoring and go get real jobs and make real money like all my friends and drive these nice cars. And I started becoming really bitter. And I started getting angry about my parents being in ministry. And what that did is that opened me up to all of a sudden starting to have these demonic visitations. And demons started coming to me at night, and they would torment me. I mean, they would terrify me. They would say things to me like, you're one of ours, and you belong to us, and you're going to be on our side. And they would say all these messages, and I would be terrified. And so my dad was always having like these really crazy ideas. You know, he was... And I always felt like all the weird people in town came to our church. You know, the church down the road, you know, the nice people went there, but I felt like all the freaks came to our church. And it was like, you know, if they came up and were normal, we were kind of like, yeah, you don't belong here. Yeah, we'll take the weird guy behind you. He comes with us. The other one, yeah, there's a nice church down the road. Go to them. That's how I felt. You know, it really wasn't that way, but that's how it felt to me. And so I remember, and I was the drummer of our church because they were desperate for musicians, obviously. And so I was the drummer of our church, and I remember I would go and I would sit on the back pew of the church, and I would cross my legs, and if any new people came in, I would just look at them and glare, and I would just look like really mean to them, because I wanted them to leave. I didn't want them to stay, because I wanted my parents to stop doing ministry. And that was just inviting more of like this demonic attack in my life. And I mean, it would keep me up at night. It was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And I never told my parents. My parents could have prayed and broken this, but I never told my parents because I was afraid they would think I was crazy and they would put me like in some institution. I mean, that's what the enemy was telling me. And I never told them because I was too scared to. And my dad would come up with these like really crazy ideas. Like one day he was like, you know, this city needs like a mobile chapel. And we need to put like a chapel on wheels. And so we took what we would call a piano moving van, which is like a big van. I don't know what you guys would call it, but it was a piano moving van. And we took and we gutted it out, and we put like carpet on the walls. We put like these benches on the side that were almost like pews. We put these cool lights in. We mounted this pulpit at the front. And we would listen to, the name of this mobile chapel was called Cruising Crisis Chapel. And it was like spread across the side, it was across the back, it was across the front, it was on the roof. Why? I'll never know. It's like airplanes would go, oh, there's the cruising, you can't get there, but there it is, nice. You know, I'm like, why did we have it on the roof? And so we would listen to police scanners, and they would have calls of like emergencies, like murders or stuff like that. And my dad would be like, let's go! And we'd all go pile in the Cruising Crisis Chapel. And we would race to the scene, and we would throw open the doors and be like, anybody need prayer? Anybody need, come here, we'll pray for you, right? And I remember all the time we would go, I'd be like, oh, Jesus, please, hope this not be one of my friends at school who's like shot his sister or something. Please, help that not, because I was so afraid they would see us running, and it had flashing lights on it. It was like, so obnoxious. And I remember at school, there were these really nice like Jaguars or BMWs or Mercedes-Benz, and then right behind that would be the Cruising Crisis. Yeah. Come and pick me up from school. And I would tell my mom, go down the road. Don't pick me up in front of the school. Like, go down the road, like a mile down the road. I will walk. I don't care if it's raining. I will walk in the rain do not get out there in front of that cruising crisis chapel. And my mother would roll down the window, pull up, and she'd go, "Hi, Robbie, come here, let's go, come on, sweetheart." And I'd be like, "Oh no, oh no." And so I was really embarrassed. But what that began to do again is even more demonic attacks started coming. And I remember one night it got so bad that I was scared to death to sleep alone. By this time I was 13 years old. And I was afraid to sleep alone. And so at 13 years old, can you guys imagine, the guys in the room, I asked my sisters if I could sleep on their floor in their bedroom. That's how bad it got. And my sisters are like, "Why? Because you want us to protect you?" And I was like, "No, because I want to protect you." And they were like, they didn't buy it. And so I was sleeping on the floor in their room, and I'll never forget, one night, all of a sudden I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw these two dark figures like standing on either side of me. And I saw this light glow. I begged my sisters that night to leave the light on. I was so terrified. And I said, "Please leave the light on." And I saw this glow like of a light underneath me. And I thought I was in a box because when I opened my eyes, I could see like what I thought was the lid of this box right in front of my eyes, like about this far. But I saw this glow under me, and I looked down, and I realized I was in the air. I was levitating, not by God's power, but by demonic power. And I looked down, and my sheet was hanging over, and I saw our little dog. We had a little dog named Buddy. And Buddy was like that tall, but he thought he was like a Great Dane. Like he thought he was a monster. You know what I mean? He would go up against like German shepherds in the park, and, like, ah, and they would be like, because he was a little dog, but he was fearless. And I looked down and I saw Buddy looking up, and he was just shaking all over and whimpering. And I realized this is really happening. And these two dark figures were standing over, and they were pulling my sheet over my head. And I don't know that this was happening, but in my mind, I thought, if that sheet covers my head, I'll die. That's how I felt. I don't know that that's what would happen, but that's how I felt. And all of a sudden it starts coming over, and I closed my eyes and I said, "Jesus, save me." And when I did, I opened my eyes and I saw those two dark figures had disappeared, and I just gently came down, back down to the floor, slowly. And I looked up, and now my dog Buddy was looking down at me because he was up on the bed, and I grabbed him and I held him, and he was like not wanting to come near me. He was like, "Ooh," because he was scared of what he saw. And I just held him, and I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. And I just held him shaking because I was absolutely terrified. Well, a couple of weeks after that, my mom used to say, the same devil that came after me before I was born started coming after me at 12 and 13 years old. And that's really true. And so my dad had this thing where he didn't care if we wanted to go to church or not. He was like, "If you live in my house, you go to church. I don't care if you want to go or not want to go. If you live in my house, you go to church. That's just the way it is." We'd have family members that would not come to visit us because to sleep in our house, you had to go to church. And they didn't want to go. Now, a lot of people are like, "Well, that's too hard. You shouldn't make your kids go to church." Let me tell you something. If you got parents who make you go to church, kiss them. They are saving your life. And I'm telling you the truth. Never begrudge that. It saved my life. And I thank God that my parents never relented. I always tell people I had a drug problem. I got drugged to school. I got drugged to work. I got drugged to church. All right, forget it. See, that was like my dad's joke, and I thought it was like, obviously didn't. But I did drug her. And my dad came to me a couple of weeks after that episode. I still had never told my parents. And my dad came to me, and he goes, "Tonight we're going to a youth group across town." And he said, "So I want you to get ready." And I said, "Well, I don't want to go to some other youth group because this is our church." And I said, "I only have to go to this church." And he goes, "Get ready, you're going." And I was like, all right. And so I go in my room, I get ready. And so we go, and we walk in this place. Now, this church had this incredible visitation of the Spirit. It started off with about 25 or 30 young people, and they decided that they were going to fast and pray and cry out to God until a revival broke out. And so they started fasting and praying, and guys, let me tell you something. There was this visitation of the Holy Spirit that came, and that youth group grew from 25 young people to 1,000 in 1 month. Yeah, it was incredible. Local newspapers were doing articles on it because all of a sudden just young people started coming in like crazy. And this is back before, you got cool instruments here, there's distortion pedals. Back then, when I was a kid, you didn't play that stuff in church. You got cool lights. We didn't have cool lights, man. You weren't, that was like ungodly. And so we went, and I was shocked because these guys were getting up and they were playing like this rock music and worshiping Jesus. And I mean, they were just like screaming their guts out, just worshiping Jesus with their whole hearts. And I was like, what are they doing? And these young people would come running by. And I mean, it was like cool music. They weren't great musicians, but they were just so excited about Jesus. And there was like a group of young people, and these were kind of like the cool kids at my school. They weren't those kids, but they were kids like them. And they come dancing by the aisle that I'm sitting on, and they're screaming out, "We love you, Jesus! We'll die for you! We'll tell everybody about you!" As they come dancing by me. And I'm like, what are they doing? I'd never seen anything like that before. And I looked at my mom, and my heart was so hard. My mother, she thought all rock music was like of the devil. Like it was, like Satan literally created rock music like in hell. And made it especially to trap and snare people, And so even Christian rock was even doubly evil. Because that was like saying I'm a Christian Satanist to her, it was Christian rock. And so all of a sudden this music is like, like really cool, like rocking music. And my mother turns and looks at me and she goes, Rob, and she has this big, like weird, goofy sort of smile on her face. And she goes, Robbie, is this the kind of music you like? And I was like, inside going, I really like it, but my mother likes it. That's like jacked up. I can't like something she likes. That would just be, ugh. And so I looked at her and I said, no, I hate this music. And she goes, really? I thought this is the music you like. And I said, no, it's stupid. And she goes, really? And I said, yeah. And about that time, another group of these young people come dancing by. We love you, Jesus. We'll die for you. They're just screaming out. And I looked at her and I said, why are those young people dancing like that? And she goes, because I think they're excited about Jesus. And I said, well, that's stupid. And she goes, you really believe that? I said, yes. And then about 10 minutes later, they come dancing by again. And I looked at my mom and I said, why aren't I dancing like that? And she goes, what? And I said, why aren't I dancing like that? Why aren't I excited? Why aren't I excited about Jesus like that? And she goes, I don't know. Why? Why not? And I said, because it's stupid. And she goes, you really believe that? I said, yes. And I really didn't. I was jealous of them. I wanted to be that excited. And so then a few more minutes passed and they had a guest speaker that night. And this guest speaker, she was this lady that was probably about, 58 years old. And she had gray hair and she was in a business suit, speaking to 1,000 young people. And she gets up to preach and they're introducing her and I'm like, oh, I will go to sleep with this old lady preaching. This is not going to work. I'm like, why did they let this old lady in here? I mean, what does she have to say to young people? Who wants to hear her? And so I'm like, oh man, I'm going to get ready to go. So I'm like sort of snuggling up against my mom, getting ready to go to sleep, because there's no way this old lady can keep a 13-year-old boy's attention. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden she gets up, and within 5 minutes of her talking, I couldn't take my eyes off her. I went from snuggling up to my mom to slowly leaning forward, and my eyes getting bigger and bigger and my jaw dropping. Everything she said was like an arrow straight into my heart. And she finishes this message, and at the end of the message, she looks back, and we were sitting in this far back. This church had exploded with growth so much that they had to knock out the entire back wall of the church, and they had to put chairs in the parking lot because they had no place for people to sit. And so we were sitting in this far back section, way over here, amongst, by this time there was about 1,500 young people. And we were sitting way back in the section, and she looks back, and she goes, and drummer, she goes, you play the drums for your church, and you're sitting right back here. And then when she said that, I was like, because she was like pointing right at me. And she goes, drummer, she goes, I don't know your name. She goes, but I want to tell you something. She goes, Satan's been trying to kill you before you were even born. And my heart dropped, and I was like, oh, my mother passed a note to her. And my mom was like going, looking at me, and I'm like, do not look at your mother. Do not look at your mother, And she goes, and drummer, she goes, I want to tell you. She goes, even Satan has been coming after you recently. And he's been visiting you and tormenting you every night. And she goes, drummer, I want to tell you why. She says, because the Lord has a message for you. And she goes, drummer, you listen to me. The word that God has for you is the words that Jesus spoke to Peter, where he says, Simon, Simon. And that was Peter's name before Jesus changed it. He said, Satan has desired you to sift you and destroy you like wheat. She says, but drummer, you listen to me. This is what Jesus says to you tonight. But drummer, I've prayed for you. And when you turned around, I'm going to use you to strengthen your brothers and sisters all over the world. Man, when she said that, it felt like somebody just punched me right in the stomach. And she goes, drummer, I don't know your name, but I want you to come up here because I want to pray for you right now. Guys, I jumped out of my seat. I was crawling over this pew that was out in the middle of this parking lot, trying to get out to the aisle, and I ran to the front. And by the time I got down there to the front, there were 6 other guys standing down there. And I'm looking at them like, and I said, I don't know what you guys are doing down here, but she wasn't talking to you, she was talking to me. You need to go sit down. And she looks at me and she pointed and she nodded, and when she came off the stage, I was the first person she came to. And she said, it's you. And I said, oh, I know it's me. And she goes, it all ends tonight. And I said, I'm ready for it to end tonight. And she prayed for me, and it wasn't a dramatic prayer. But guys, when I went home that night, everything changed. I never had a demonic visitation like that again. I never had any more attacks like that again. And all of a sudden, guys, I was sitting on the back row of our church. That next Sunday, I moved to the very front row. We had this little old lady named Granny Maddie. And she would always sit in the front right side at the very front of the pew. I took her spot. She nearly left the church over it. And I was like, I don't care, I ain't moving. I'm sitting right here. Now, my dad was the preacher. My dad was the pastor, but I sat there, I bought a brand new notepad, and I had my Bible every service. I would take notes, and I would write down stuff, and I would sit there and I would go back and I would look at those notes. I didn't care what. I told my dad, we had a Wednesday night and a Sunday morning service. I told my dad, I said, we don't have enough church services around here. We need to start another one. And so he added a Friday night service just for me. I mean, there was me and 2 old ladies that came. That was it. But we had it because he's like, man, if my kid, who was like, the spawn of Satan before, now wants another church service, I'm giving it to him. You know what I mean? And I sat there and I went to my dad and I said, we need to start one of those bands like that church. I said, we need to start one of those revivals here. We need to do whatever it takes. I told my dad, I said, we need to get the word out. We need to tell everybody about Jesus. Guys, I was 13 years old. I was only 13 years old. And I remember telling my dad, I said, we got to start. Now, we didn't have any money. We were a poor church. And my dad said, he goes, where are we going to do that? Where are we going to have those concerts? We don't have. I said, let's use that old garage we got out back. And so we took this garage and we turned it into like a band shelter. And I told my dad, I said, we made this staging. We had a company that was next door that did renovations on houses. And we got all their old wood and we bought, made staging like this. And we had carpet that had come out of old houses, and there were like blood stains and cigarette smoke and paint stains all over the place, fingernail polish. But man, we covered it and we built this, and we couldn't afford like nice lights. So we took old paint cans, drilled holes in them, put light receptacles in them, hardwired them to a light board, which was just a bunch of light switches. I mean, we were like a firefighter's dream. Firefighters were like, yes, kids, keep on. We want to put out a fire sometime. We made our own flash pods. You guys know what flash pods are? Anybody heard of the band Kiss? Ask your great-grandparents about it. They'll explain it. But we made these flash pods where we would be worshiping, and then all of a sudden, there would be these explosions. That's our flash pods. And we made our own with, I'm not going to tell you, because you'll try. It was dangerous. Gunpowder was involved, and pipes. That's all I'll say. But we couldn't set the flash pods out until the very last song because the gunpowder, the smoke was so bad that our lead singer couldn't sing anymore after that. At the end of the song. But we were so ready, and so I went to a printer, and I told this guy at a print shop, I said, I need you to make 5,000 flyers. And he goes, what? And I said, yes. He said, for every flyer, there's going to be a young person that's going to give their heart to Jesus if you'll make these flyers. And the name of our band, guess what it was called? Power. Of course. Power. And so we had this flashing light that said power, and the W, the P, the R, they were all like lightning bolts. I mean, it was so cool. And so we would flash that, and explosions and flashing lights. And we didn't have like nice gels that would cover the lights. So we took those, you guys, ask your grandparents about this again. But we had these plastic covers that would cover sheets of paper. We would cut those, and we would put those over the lights. By the end of the evening, those were melting. And so it was like liquid fire falling from the lights at the end of the evening. But we were so excited. And I went to this print shop, and I said, would you make this? And the guy at the print shop says, he goes, kid, how much money do you have? And I said, well, I don't have any money. And he goes, well, kid, that printing costs money. He goes, you got to have money. And I looked at him and I said, do you not understand? Young people are dying without Jesus. And those flyers are the thing that's stopping them from knowing them. And I kept talking to this guy, and finally he's like, okay, kid, if you'll just shut up. He said, I'll make 1,000 free. And he goes, but you come and you work for 2,000. And he goes, you come and clean up the print shop and you do all this stuff. And he says, if you'll come and do that, he goes, I'll make you 3,000, but you're going to pay for 2,000 by working here, and I'll donate 1,000. And I was like, yes. And so our band, we started working on our band. We started practicing songs because we were going to have this sort of grand opening night, And we were, imagine the worst band you ever heard being like here. We were here. Like we were really bad. Like our guitar player had rusty strings and he didn't realize that was bad. It was that bad, And so, but we made a lot of noise and we worshiped our guts out. And so I was so excited. For months we were handing out these flyers. As soon as I get out of school, we would go to the public schools and hand out flyers. And we were like, and we had the front picture that had the Power logo on it. It had a picture of Jesus, and it says, now appearing at Power. Picture of Jesus. And so we were handing those out, and I remember the big night, the night that it was going to be this unveiling night. And I was so excited. And we were sort of looking out, and my dad was getting out to introduce us. And guys, it was amazing. That night, people came pouring in. pouring in. We probably had 20 people pour in. I looked out, there was like only 20 people. And I looked at the rest of the bandmates, and I said, do you see all those people out there? And they were like, Robby, there's 20 people out there. And I said, you know what I see? And they said, what? They said, I see 2,000. And they're like, you need glasses. Because there's only 20 people out there. And I'm like, well, I see 2,000. And I said, for each one of those, there's another 100 that'll come if we share Jesus with them. And they got up and they introduced us, and I remember walking out, and this was in a town called Atlanta, Georgia, and I get up like, hello, Atlanta! And they're like, hey! Robby, there's only 20 of us, you know? But we got out and we worshiped our guts out, man. We worshiped as if there were 2,000. We were singing. And I was the preacher of the group. Guys, we did that for 4 years, every Saturday night without stopping. We kept doing it over. We never had more than 50 people ever show up. But we never stopped. We just kept going. We kept doing it no matter what. And finally, one day, when I was 15 years old, we got an invitation from this church that was First Methodist Church of Atlanta, Georgia, in the downtown area. And they invited us to come, and they invited us to play on the front lawn of their church. And I was like, this is our big break. And I told the band, I said, this is it. I said, after this, we're getting signed. We're getting a record deal after this. And they were like, Robby, you know, this is not a big break. This is just a church downtown. I'm like, no. There's going to be thousands there. And we got out there, and we didn't have like portable staging. And so I went to that place that rehabbed homes next door, and I asked them if we could borrow some of their scaffolding. And so I put my drums on top of this scaffolding stage. So my drum set was 6 feet off the ground. I kept trying to get our guitar player to jump off of it at one point in the song, and he wouldn't do it for some reason. I don't understand why. And we got out, and we made some lights to come, and they're flashing, and we're worshiping, and we're just singing. And man, guys, it was really cool. We had probably about 250 people come out on that lawn. And I was excited, and again, I was kind of the preacher of the group, and my dad said, now this is how bad of a band we were. My dad was our sound man. My mom was our light man. But they were just so happy to be doing this because we love Jesus. They didn't care. And so we get out, and I was so excited. My dad said, do not come down off the drum stage. He says, because if you do, you could trip and fall and hurt yourself, and it's 6 feet high. And he said, don't come up. He goes, you're going to have to preach from the drum stage. And I was like, okay. And so we get to a stopping point, and I grab my Bible, and I put it on my floor tom. And I started to preach, and I've got this mic hanging down, and I started to preach. And it was so cool. All of a sudden, everybody's listening. And then all of a sudden, this guy comes from around the corner. And he's like screaming and hollering. He's like, shut up! Shut up! Shut the blank up now! And he's like screaming and hollering. Now, I have been trained, whoever has the microphone is in charge of the crowd. Don't give up the microphone, or you give up the crowd. And so I just got closer to the microphone. I'm like, I got a mic, you don't. I can talk louder than you can. And so I just kept going. But I started noticing everybody's eyes as I kept going. They were like, more and more. And I'm like, I don't know what verse I'm in right now, but this is good. I mean, people's jaws are dropped, eyes are big. Man, this is some powerful preaching. I need to remember this passage because this is really good. And people are just running. And then all of a sudden, my drum stage starts shaking. And I look over, dude is climbing up my drum stage. And I pull the mic even closer, and I'm like, I'm not going to either look at him or acknowledge it. I'm going to just keep going. And so I keep going, and I just ignore it, and he's still screaming, shut up! Shut up! Shut up now! And I just keep going. And I look back, and he starts tapping me on the back of the head. And I'm like as if that's going to make me stop. You know, yeah, tap away, buddy. I'm not stopping. And I just kept going. Well, I look back at my mom on the light board, and my mom's going, And I can't hear her. She's going, and I look at my dad, and my dad's going, and I'm like, man, this is so powerful that my mom, the most godly human being on the planet, is going to give her life to Jesus all over again because of my preaching. I mean, this is good stuff. And so I'm like, man, I'm really going for it. I'm getting to the come to Jesus moment, you know? I'm like right there at it. And then all of a sudden, dude finally stops tapping, and I'm like, thank God. And all of a sudden, my drum stage starts shaking again, and he's climbing down off the drum stage. I'm like, finally, that's over. And then the pastor of the church that was hosting us, he steps up to the microphone that was on the ground, and he goes, all right now, and his voice was shaking. I'm like, man, this guy pastors a large church. Why is his voice shaking? Man, this is not a big crowd. And he's like, all right now, we're sorry if we offended anybody, and the concert's over. God bless you, just go home. And I'm like, why did he stop? My mom, the most godly person on earth, was about to give her life to Jesus, and you just interrupted it. And then all of a sudden, our bass player comes running up, and I'm like, what happened? And our bass player comes running up and climbs up the drum stage, and he goes, Robby! And I said, yeah. He goes, dude! He goes, that was crazy! And I said, I know, right? I said, this was like really good preaching. Like, everybody's jaws were dropped, their eyes were huge. And he goes, I don't know what you're talking about. He goes, I'm talking about when the guy had the gun to your head. And I said, good. Gun? And he goes, yeah, that was awesome! And I'm like, a gun. A gun. And he goes, yeah, dude. He goes, you were fearless. And I was like, yeah, fearless. And he goes, dude, that's so cool. And he's like patting me on the back. I'm like, good. And I climb down off the stage. And I go out, and he's like, everybody's like, wow, Robby, that was incredible. And guess what happened? That guy walks up to the pastor of that church, and the pastor's like, hey, I'm sorry. And he goes, no. He goes, I was wrong. And he looks at the pastor, and he goes, I want what that boy has. And the pastor looks at him, he goes, we're sorry we upset you. And he goes, no, I have to have what that boy has. And the pastor goes, what? And he goes, even when I was holding a gun to his head, threatening to blow his brains out, he kept preaching because he believes in what he's talking about so much. He goes, I have to have that. I had no clue! I was absolutely oblivious to the gun. I thought he was tapping on my head. That guy gave his life to Jesus that night. Right there. Gave his life to Christ. That guy is still in that church to this day. And everybody's like, way to go, man. You're fearless. And I'm like, oh. Fearless. And as we're driving home, my legs are still shaking, and I'm scared to tell anybody I didn't know there was a gun. The Lord spoke to me, and he said, Robby, he said, that's how I want you to live. And I was like, ignorant? Naive? I can do that. And he goes, no. He said, I want you to live as if every day of your life is in my hands. And that you won't go out one day too soon or one day too late. That all your days belong to me. No matter what. You guys, I just said, Lord, I'm not sure if I know how to do that. But if you'll help me do that, it's all yours. Because I want to be like those young people that were excited and on fire for Jesus. And didn't care what people thought about them. Didn't care what people thought. Didn't care if they looked foolish. They just wanted all that they could get for Jesus. They wanted to tell everybody about Jesus. Guys, from that point on, I've been hooked. I'm telling as many people about Jesus as I could. Let me tell you guys something. God wants to put his power on your life. He wants to put his presence on your life. He wants to demonstrate the reality of who he is through you. Can I tell you? How many of you have prayed for revival? Raise your hand. Can I tell you? If you're praying for a revival, you're praying for yourself. You are the revival for Scotland. It's Christ in you. You're the hope of this nation. Christ in you. That's God's plan to see your nation change. That's God's plan to see the entire world change. Can I show you guys a short little video? Is that okay? You can answer me. Is that okay? And I want to show you this because I want to show you how God wants to use you. This is a little video of my friend Brian Welch, who's one of the lead guitar players for Korn. If you guys are listening to his music, I would encourage you not to. Brian actually would say the same thing. But Brian, he left Korn when he gave his life to Jesus because God completely delivered him from drugs and just, his life was just a mess. Completely turned him around. And then 8 years later, God spoke to him and said, I want you to go back. And he said, no, I will not go back to that. And the Lord kept speaking to him and speaking to him. Finally, he said, if you tell two of my pastors that I'm supposed to go back and neither one of them have talked to each other, then I'll do it. And God spoke to two of his pastors, a senior pastor and another pastor, and told him, the Lord said you're supposed to go back. And so he went back. And he said, the Lord spoke to him and said, I want you to preach at every show. I want you to gather people and I want you to preach to them and tell them about Jesus. And so I've been helping Brian for a while now, or to gather people after shows and bring them together. And he wants to only do it with like 50 or 60 people because he says, I want to look them right in the eye when I share my testimony and when I share Jesus with them, when I see them accept Jesus. And he'll pray for them and prophesy to them, and he sees people get healed. Well, Brian had asked me, at one of his shows, he says, man, he goes, I'm not really seeing a lot of, giving words of knowledge and seeing them take effect as much as I want. And he said, would you kind of come help me out a little bit? So I said, okay, I can do these shows here. I've got a pretty full schedule, but I'll come to these ones. And so this is one we came to. Now, this particular night, there was this guy that we'd invited back, and this guy was so drunk and so plastered, and he was like hollering out, his speech was slurred, and he's like, I want to take Head, that's a stage name, Head. He goes, I want to take Head to the best strip clubs in Illinois. He goes, somebody tell me the best strip clubs, I want to take Head there. And I was so mad at this guy, because he had this girlfriend there, and she was so embarrassed and so humiliated by what he was saying. And it just made me so mad, And so all of a sudden, Brian came out, and when he did, and I was trying to keep this guy quiet, and I'm like, man, we've got to kick this guy out of here, because he's going to mess this whole thing up, And Brian came out, and he preached the gospel, he shared his testimony, and then he turns and he looks at me, and he goes, Robby, do you have any words from the Lord for people? And I got up, and I said, yeah, and I pointed to this one guy, and I said, this guy right here, I said, are you out of a job? And the guy goes, yeah. And I said, because of that, you've got some real financial problems. He goes, I've been out of a job for 6 months because I can't get work. And he goes, yeah, I'm in bad financial shape. And I said, no, I'm not sure what's going on with your back, but I said, is your lower back jacked up? And he goes, yeah. He goes, I can't bend it. I'm in horrific pain right now. And I said, you're in pain now? And he goes, yeah. And I said, come here. And so I prayed for this guy. And I said, now check your back. And this guy goes to check his back, and he looks shocked, and he goes, there's no pain. He goes, it's all gone. And I said, that's really cool. And I said, now let me tell you something. We stop and think that like in places like that it's not going to happen as fast. Can I tell you? It happens faster. In places that are darker. And so he says, he says, I don't feel any pain. I said, let me tell you something. I said, Jesus just introduced himself to you and he just showed you how he wants to use you the rest of your life. And I said, matter of fact, let me demonstrate that to you. Come here. And this guy was not a Christian. He wasn't following God. And I said, let me show you something. I said, is there anybody here with problems in their knees? And Brian Welch speaks up and he goes, Robby, no. He goes, this guy right here. And he points to the drunk guy. And I'm like, oh, Lord, no. And he goes, this guy. He goes, he broke his back 8 years ago at a corn show. And he says, he can't bend past this. He goes, pray for him next. And I was like, oh, man, this is the drunk, crazy guy. And so I said, okay. I said, come here. And so he comes over. And so I have the guy that's not a Christian, but whose back was just healed. I said, let me show you how Jesus wants you. And I said, now repeat this prayer after me. And we'll show the video and the testimony. Make sure the volume's up enough to where they can hear it if you would. And it's the corn one. Jesus healed. All pain, get out now. Vertebrae line up. Muscles relax. Nerves be loose. Be healed for the glory of Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, my brother, now check your back. Get in and check your back. You can feel it, can't you? Can you feel it? The presence of God was all over this. All right, go ahead. He's all over me. Holy Spirit's all over me right now. Give me a number where you're at right now, my friend. See that? That's how it's now. Don't be nice. You were at 10 in pain before. 0's no pain, my friend.
I came here with a ton of pain.
Where are you at now? Don't be nice. Tell us.
Not being nice. I just touched my toes for the first time. Jump.
Don't be nice. Don't, yeah, so Jesus just used you to heal his back. No matter what you believe, no matter what you feel. And in doing that, he showed you how he wants to use you the rest of your life. And doing that for people. And he just demonstrated that to all of you. Guys, this is
guys. So this is my buddy TJ. So what do you got to say, TJ?
I'm TJ. I was fortunate enough to be here today, chosen. This larger gentleman had back problems as well. They touched him, they healed him. I spoke up. If this is real, can you please help me? He touched me.
What's wrong with your back?
Prayed for me. I had broken my back in 2008. I have herniated and bulging lumbar 5 through 7. Haven't been able to touch. I couldn't go past my knees. Haven't been able to touch my toes in 8 years. Sucked in on bed. Today, they touched me. They brought it to me to where I could put my hands all the way up and come down. Unbelievable.
And you haven't done that in 8 years.
8 years, I can't tie my shoes.
Right.
This is where as far as I can go.
Right. At a corn concert.
At a corn concert. Unbelievable.
Awesome, man.
I
Awesome.
appreciate it.
Yes.
Guys, let me tell you something. We stop and we think we can't do this. That guy praying for the guy wasn't even a Christian. He's praying for a guy who's an atheist. Both of them get healed, and both of them give their lives to Christ right after that. The drunk guy, you're hearing him speak clearly because he was instantly sober as he was being healed. That same power lives inside of you if you have a relationship with Jesus Christ. It lives inside of you. And guys, let me tell you something. We need to let it out. We need to put Jesus on display in our community. We need to put Jesus on display in our schools. Not just talk about him, but put him on display for everyone to see. Because if they see him, they'll know that they want him.
your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord.
We just sing, we give thanks for what God's done here.
All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord.
Proclaim it.
All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you,
One more time, we're just going to sing all together. Let's lay into it. We've got a great God, a powerful God, a God that heals, a God that saves, a God that gives us freedom, a God that gives us power. So we're going to lay into this. We're going to proclaim it to the nation, proclaim all